I think because obviously, you know, we're providing guidance to this Scottish Health Walk network. Everyone, it's just like everyone's following it like letter of the law. So, you know, we're the kind of the interpreter of the government guidance for them. So people do read it. So you need to do it quite well, or else you get lots of questions. Yeah. It's a bit tricky. Under lock, they're not as strong, they're not as fit, so they're worried about coming back and holding people up, and just worried about being in a group situation again when, you know, people really haven't experienced that for so long. So we're doing a lot of work with our projects and volunteers to just raise awareness. Lots of talk about mental health and how people might be struggling at the moment, how to have supportive conversations, and just to make sure that everyone's different and so everyone's welcome, and people might be experiencing things in different ways. So just, be kind and look after each other is our main message.
I think that's a brilliant message in general, actually. Be kind, look after each other. I have some really practical questions for you, but I'm also aware that actually there'll be people in the audience have questions as well. So just a reminder, please do use the chat box to send us any questions that you might have, and that'll allow us to just ask your questions to the speakers as well at this point. I think one of my questions was about, actually, some of us, Scotland's a beautiful place, and some of us are very lucky in the green space that we have access to, and some of us don't have any green space at all. And I would love to hear from you both about, actually, do you need to live somewhere with a lot of green space? Do you need to live on the edge of the countryside to be able to make use of the outdoors in this way?
You go, Ian.
Okay. I think in some ways it's actually the opposite. I think that if you live in kind of more rural areas, there is a lot of green space, but how accessible a lot of it is, in terms of both restrictions in terms of getting in and physical restrictions of how you can access it, actually means that quite often the green space is more available in smaller urban areas. And that's something we kind of campaign for quite a lot. I mean, the big movement around it's 20-minute communities where actually you can access all the things you need, including green space, within 20 minutes. But what we'd kind of encourage is people to think about, kind of, quite often if you live in a city, everyone knows the big name parks in that city, but actually there are a lot smaller green spaces that kind of are available. And I've certainly, even from a personal experience where I live, I've discovered small kind of local nature areas and things that I never knew were around. So I think it is about having a look at kind of what is available locally.
Yeah, I think as well, you know, green space is essentially nature. It's a space where nature's allowed to grow. And I think a lot of the work we've been doing, particularly with some of our groups who are in more urban areas, is actually just getting people to notice the nature that's there. So it might not be a huge, massive park. It might be a small bunch of primroses on the path, or you know, somewhere where maybe nature's, you know, found a home where it shouldn't. So it's about just taking more time to notice where you live and where there is nature, not necessarily everyone having access to amazing, grand, you know, natural spaces. So yeah, it's just about being a bit more observant, taking the time, being a bit more mindful as you're walking about what's around you and enjoying that.
I think it's a great way of putting it, as nature can make itself anywhere and often in very unexpected places. And now we have to ask a question that I think is very relevant to everyone in the UK, but perhaps particularly relevant to those of us living in Scotland, which is, what about the weather? So I think I'm sitting in Edinburgh at the moment, looking out on another very grey, very rainy day. What tips and advice do you have for people in terms of how we deal with the weather? Because unfortunately, it's not going to go away.
Shall I go first? So I think we've found that, yes, the weather can be awful. It can be dreadful. But we encourage people to dress as appropriate as they can. Not everyone has, you know, the money for full waterproofs and walking boots, and, you know, as long as you're comfortable and warm as you can be, that's great. But also, I think for a lot of the groups, the advantage of getting out and walking is stronger than the disadvantage of the weather sometimes. So I think people are willing to put up with a bit of rain, although we've had quite a lot of snow this year as well. So I think people view it as, yeah, sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. It's all part of nature. Sometimes it can be enjoyed, you know, going out for a walk in the rain. But I think people on the whole find the benefits of participating and being out with their friends in a group and talking. It outweighs the benefit of sometimes getting a little bit down.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd echo that. I mean, I think I just noticed there's a comment saying that somebody's put the weather's had a huge impact on us over the last week, having to cancel a few of our outdoor sessions. I think the reality is on occasions the weather can be that bad, there is no option but cancel. But one of the things, again, that we talk about is being prepared. One of the, for kind of some of the events that we've talked about, we quite often use an approach which is, we've kind of called bucket, blanket and brolly. So essentially, if we're coming together outdoors, the cheapest way of actually getting some cover is a bucket as a seat, a blanket to keep warm, and a brolly. And it's just about trying to be prepared for that. But unfortunately, sometimes the Scottish weather doesn't play ball.
Yes, that's a very good way of putting it. You know, there are always going to be occasions where you just go, oh, I don't think that's going to be worth it. But I've been surprised on the number of times where I've not wanted to go outside in the rain and yet have actually quite enjoyed the company and the exercise when I've been out there. There's a fantastic question that's just come up in the chats about the importance of play outside, which I'd be really interested if either of you have anything to add on. Because I think as a society, and as Mark has highlighted in his question, we put a lot of emphasis on play as being something for children and not necessarily something for adults. So how do we encourage basically better access, better opportunities for adults to be able to kind of play outside and just have fun rather than it necessarily being something, say, very structured or very productive?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And just on that note as well, we do support quite a lot of buggy walking groups. I think someone mentioned it in the chat as well. So we're trying to really, foster this idea of a walk being fun and enjoyable for even those at really small age. So it's something they carry on through life. But it's really interesting for adults as well. I mean, we do quite a lot of work to encourage like photography walks, so people going out to take photos on a walk, or there's sometimes themed walks where people learn about the trees around them from expo, or history walks. So sometimes just adding in a different dimension to the walk in terms of learning or creativity just adds something, and people really enjoy that as well. And also we've got a podcast around mindfulness walks as well. So it's not play, but it's just more of that reflective, how to walk mindfully as well. And that might be something that people haven't thought about introducing onto a walk. We've also got an artist in residence at Paths for All, and he's been working with a lot of our groups just to have a conversation with them about how they can make their walks more creative. So some have designed walking sticks with poems on, some have put in kind of small sculptures along the walking route as well, and just learning about place names, linking different places on the routes and how they can maybe use that in poetry and creative writing. So yeah, it's nice to have a different aspect rather than just the physical act of putting one foot in front of the other.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's difficult in terms of kind of it's a mindset about encouraging adults to play. I mean, I personally am a massive cycling geek, and I cycle off road, so I kind of go out and play in the woods on the bike all the time and accept that I'm going to get wet. And it's about trying to get that message across. And again, there's a great comment in the chat from Margaret about kind of accepting the weather and being prepared and encouraging people to do that. And it's that first instance that's often the hardest, is, as you said, Sophie, once you've got over that and done it, you kind of accept a little bit in terms of weather. And it is something we do in terms of trying to kind of promote what's available and where people can enjoy those spaces.
I know that unfortunately Francis has to Francis has to leave us a little bit early. So I'd just like to say at this point, thank you so much for joining us, Francis, and for sharing your insight into this. Francis has also left us some links as to how you can get involved in the walks that Paths for All are running, and we'll put that in the chat for you as well. But I would just like to say thank you, Francis, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Not at all. It's been lovely to be here. Just to say as well, for those of us who aren't in Scotland, and if you're interested in getting involved in health walks in Northern Ireland, Wales, or England, get in touch, because I can forward on links for those areas as well. And there's also a link there just in terms of some of our campaigns and our resources, and including some activities you can do with young people and old people and everyone in between when you're out on a walk. So yeah, happy walking everyone, and I hope the rest of the session goes really well. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Frances. And now we're going to hand over to Ian. So Green Space Scotland have actually put together some fantastic resources, which are called Better Outside, and are about kind of the part inspiration, part practicality is I think how I would describe them, as to the different kinds of events you can run outdoors. So what we're going to do now is Ian's going to talk us through them a little bit and to how you can use them. And then after that, we're going to break into some groups. And that's an opportunity actually for us all to think about what sort of things we're interested in terms of getting outdoors and sort of activities, and to kind of throw around some ideas with some other people as to how that can happen. So for example, we're going to try and put the people who've put nature in their name, we're going to try and put them together. People who've put art in their name, we'll try and put you together so people can have a think with some people with similar interests. Just a reminder that if you haven't put that in your name, you can still do that. And if not, we will try and put you in a group that we think you'll find interesting. You just change your name by right-clicking on your own face, on your own video, and clicking rename and putting a topic in the start that you think you would find interesting. Ian, can I come over to you, and are you able to share your screen, or would you like some assistance?
I should be able to share it. Hold on one second. Well, hopefully you can all now see my presentation. I'll take no response as a yes.
We can see it. It's good.
Excellent. Right, I'll talk you through that. So, as I said previously, my name's Ian Goodman. I'm a programme manager for Green Space Scotland. We've been in existence since 2002, providing a national lead on green space, working towards our goal that everyone living and working in urban Scotland has easy access to quality green space, meets local needs and improves their quality of life. I think the key word quality there is really important for us, because it's not just about there being a green space, but we're very much about promoting that being quality and appropriate for use for where it is. We've been working to influence policy around green space both locally and nationally. During the pandemic, we got some funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund to develop our Better Outside resources. The origin of the resources really came from when we were hearing directly from community groups about what they'd been doing outside, and lots of kind of heartwarming stories of how local green spaces, communal gardens, back greens and backcourt were helping people connect and cope with the stress and the anxiety of lockdown. We kind of found around everything from home gardening packs, colourful potato sacks, bug bingo, yarn bombing of rainbows and butterflies, shopping drop-offs for older neighbours who were getting through their flower supplies. As lockdown restrictions started to ease, many groups began finding ways of taking the indoors outdoors, moving activities from community centres, village halls, schools and leisure centres into local parks and green space. But what we've done is we've developed a number of resources around 7 main kind of activity areas, as you can see on screen: arts and culture, community centre, growing, outdoor play, employability, health and well-being, and youth work, what we call youth work at al fresco. And then on top of that, we've developed some technical resources and an ideas source book that I'll kind of come on to. I am not planning to take you through every one of these because there's quite a lot of information on them. So it's just going to run you through one of the areas and how we've kind of structured the information. So the resources on arts, culture and heritage outside, as we mentioned earlier, around the outdoor cinema. So we've got kind of a short video case study of the group in Glasgow that ran that outdoor cinema. And so what we've done is each section is split into a number of ideas, a number of sections. So making it happen, practical hints and tips on how on actually delivering your activities, your community activities outdoors, how to plan them and how much it's going to cost. Things to consider. And that's not just about the Scottish weather, but also considerations like how many volunteers you might need, how best to advertise your event and make it as welcoming and inclusive as possible, and also to fit in with any restrictions that are in place. Real life examples, and what we've called that is inspiring ideas, and what we've pulled together is some ideas for each of those sections on what has happened, what people have done, to just give groups an idea of what is possible, because often some of the best ideas come from groups that have already done things. Who can help? So in the arts, culture and heritage section, we've got links to other resources that can help you put on these things outside. So for example, we've got a link to Outdoor Arts UK and their COVID resources and information, as well as lists of Scottish art professionals with capacity to deliver these events. Sorry, I didn't mean to play that video. Then we have our two really practical resources. So we've got our technical resources and our idea source book. The technical resources cover some of the really simple things you need to consider about actually moving your events outside, and how they can happen in parks, green spaces, and how you can kind of deliver those. So those cover everything from how to put up a really simple shelter, how to actually kind of, as I've said before, advertise and promote your events. I mean, and one of the great examples we've got is an employment charity that has actually, one of their employment programs for ex-servicemen that they run, they've actually decided to move that completely outdoors, and actually found that a lot of the events and a lot of the training and the information they deliver indoors, they can actually deliver better and with more information out. And then finally, the ideas source book. What we've kind of done is split that into, as you can see, small, medium and large interventions. So what we've done is split that as very much a kind of around kind of cost. So actually, if it's a community activity and you want to deliver something outdoors, what can you do with a small cost intervention that could actually be delivered quickly at low cost and actually deliver what you want? And then looking at medium and large interventions. And I think I mentioned before, this is just an example of one of the areas we're talking about in terms of kind of shelter or providing resources outside. So at the smallest level, what we talk about, I mentioned earlier, the bucket, blanket, brolly. So actually you give heat, warmth and kind of rain shelter very, very easily. But then whether you can kind of convert or repurpose shelters that are already in existence, or at a far more formal level, actually delivering new shelters or kind of and then finally, I've got a link to the resources. Let's see if we can actually, you can see I'm always brave is to actually use the internet during a presentation, but hopefully you can see that. And what we've got is the links in each of these. And as you can see, if I look at the free range community centre area, we've got some of our featured projects where we talk about in a bit more detail about how groups have delivered things outside, and then what we've called inspiring ideas, where we just give a summary of some of the projects that have been delivered. So we hope it's a really useful resource for people to use in a variety of ways. And then finally, I just wanted to promote a couple of other things that we do at Green Space Scotland. We deliver the Tesco community grants in Scotland, relaunched, and that's for small project funding for kind of community projects across Scotland of up to 1,500. Information about those resources and those grant process on there, which is open at the moment. And if for those groups and people who are outside of Scotland, again, as Francis said, I can share the links to its groundwork that delivers that in the rest of the UK. And then finally, I just wanted to highlight, we also run a project called My Park Scotland. It's Scotland's only crowdfunding dedicated parks and green spaces and groups that are trying to use them. So we actually run that and can support groups in looking to attract public donations for their project. I think that's me. I think think that's everything around those better outside resources, but obviously either now or later, Sophie, depending on how you want to do the session, I'm quite happy to answer any questions on those resources.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Ian. I think we've got time for some questions now. So if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask at this stage, again, you can just pop those in the chat before we go into the breakout rooms. I think one of the things that I'm just reflecting on is how interrelated all of these different kinds of activity are. I'm very intrigued by the idea of basically an outdoor community centre. So I have an outdoor garden, basically a communal gardening project that's near me. I'm in Leith. But in practice, that also operates as a community space. You know, markets are held there, events are held there, people socialise there while they're gardening. You know, it's been home to food projects during lockdown. And I'm very intrigued by actually how interrelated all these things are. So we have a question that you might be able to help us with here, Ian, about whether you need planning permission for an outdoor shelter. And I'm guessing part of this relates to how big it is and how permanent it is, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely, that's precisely it. I mean, if it's a permanent shelter, then on the size, then yes, the answer is probably yes. I guess in a way, the more pertinent question as well, or the secondary question about that is ensuring that as a community group you have permission to actually on a site, because quite often obviously community groups are running activities and events on land that they necessarily own. So it might be a council owned park or space. So I would kind of encourage actually to put that on site. And if it's a non-permanent shelter, I think as long as permission's in sight, then that's great. I think that, and so planning permission wouldn't be delivered, but the more expensive end of the scale, it may well be the case.
Excellent. Very practical answer there. And I think that's very much one to keep in mind is think about what's possible as well in your area. If something more permanent isn't possible, what can you do that kind of gets you through without having to put up a more permanent structure? We're going to go into some breakout rooms now to give you an opportunity to talk to some other people, some like-minded people with some similar interests, and throw some ideas around. I would love you to, obviously it's your space and you can use it how you want, but we would love you to kind of use the opportunity maybe to think about what sort of things you could do in your area, what sorts of things might help you get there. If you've been inspired and you're thinking, I would love an outdoor community centre, a free range community centre, who might you need to talk to? What might you do in terms of the weather? But it's your space. We're going to pop you in for about 20 minutes. Please use this opportunity just to get to know some new people and share some ideas. And then we'll bring you back and you can share with us anything that you would like to. Joe. Hello, everyone. Lovely to see you all back and lots of smiling faces as well. Did you enjoy your breakout rooms? Good chats? Yes, excellent.
We getting stranded. We didn't have to escape, so we all exited and have to rejoin.
Or did you leave and come back, or you weren't sure how to leave, is it?
Leave, so we clicked on leave, but that locked us out completely. So I had to reconnect onto this.
Oh, I see. Well, I'm glad that you managed to sort it and come back. Does anyone want to share anything that they were talking about? I know we had a couple of groups talking about nature. Does anyone from the nature group want to feedback on anything they were talking about? Silence.
The nature group is a group I was in, and we're the ones who didn't know how to exit. We were now at time, and we kept talking, so I just wondering what happened. Yeah, we're just talking about the engagement with the wider community. Talking about sensory gardens, elderly kids, and trying to make the areas more accessible to people of all abilities and all interests.
I love that. I feel like it's when we talk about nature, we don't often think about when we talk about outside, we don't often put enough thought into how we make that accessible to everyone. I think that's a great way of looking at it, actually. I think we've got a couple of people feeding back through the chat. Does anyone else have anything they want to share that came up? Any things that sparked excitement in them that they were talking about?
I'm trying to get somebody else to feedback, and she's very kindly saying my background's nicer than hers. There were 5 of us with some communication difficulties, but we chatted as well as talked, and it was difficult to get going, but interesting and enjoyable. And I think one of the things we ended up talking about was your point, Sophie, about how so many things overlap. We can talk about any issue we like in our lives by talking first about our outdoor experiences with nature, and vice versa. We can exploit, if you like, pockets of nature or vast acres of nature to do all sorts of beneficial things, whether it's with children, whether it's playful, whether it's all the categories we've talked about. But I think the nugget for me came towards the end when we were talking about the difficulty of people getting back to recovering from their experiences, especially the elderly in one case and young children in another, and how important small steps are to help people move forward, to move on. And that might just be for an elderly, infirm, vulnerable, scared person being encouraged to wrap up warm and dry and feel the wind on their face. Boom, result. And like, we talked about depression, we talked about ill health and wider. So it was great. It was a good experience. Thank you.
You put that very eloquently as well. I totally agree. The idea that actually basically everything that we experience at all points in our lives, we can connect in some way to the outdoors, and the outdoors can provide a positive way for us to experience that and to reflect and connect wherever we're at. So I think you put that very eloquently. Thank you, Mark. Ruth has also made a point in the chat about, and I think this kind of builds on that actually outdoor spaces often feel quite safe and quite neutral. I've been thinking about this a lot recently, that, if you take someone somewhere to have a conversation that's an inside space, that can feel off-putting, it can feel formal, it can feel fancy. Whereas actually, if you're going for a walk in a park, for example, or even just, in a green space that's near to you, that's a neutral space. There's much less power involved in any of that. And, it's the sort of thing that because anyone can access it, ideally, it does feel a lot safer for a lot of people. So that's a really good point, Ruth. Thank you. Does anyone else have anything they want to share? You can share in the chat as well.
I had a great chat with James about cooking outdoors, and James is obviously an expert in this, so it's really useful for me because I came along with no ideas and just really open ears, and he's doing some great stuff and knows how to organize everything. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and right down to giving me some examples of what you could cook outside, like pancakes and pizza and potato bread, which is fantastic. I love that idea. Can you see my stomach rumbling when you say that? I think that's a fantastic idea. James, is this something you do a lot of, cooking outdoors? I love the idea of cooking potato breads.
Absolutely. Potato bread it seems to be an Irish thing, but I think it's probably not completely Irish, but Scottish as well. Another thing she didn't mention as well, which is one of the highlights that I had, is when we did an event on an organic farm, and the organic farm had a clay pizza oven, and we got beetroots, small beetroots from the organic farm, and we had like baked beetroot in the pizza oven. So I mean, the pizza oven just doesn't need to be for pizza. And then I was I'm very much like outdoors bushcraft person, so creating sheltered spaces in woodland is particularly good, because you can put up lightweight tarpaulins between the trees, and then you can have create spaces You know, I do know one like one instance where there was a community garden and there was a polytunnel. This is at the start of COVID, and there was all that was available was one polytunnel, and as soon as it rained, everybody would head for the polytunnel, and that actually defeated the purpose of, you know, COVID regulations. So then I helped them to put up tarpaulins around the place, so that spaces where people can come. You can do all sorts, but you really have to keep one step with outdoor stuff. Is keeping one step ahead all the time. Weather forecast is your favorite program on TV.
Yes, I like that. I relate to that very strongly.
And one more thing, cooking around the fire and the social aspect, and there's a thing called stick bread, you know, where you wrap dough around a twig, and that really much, I mean, the fire is the, you know, the primal thing, the like tribal stuff that people like really get into, and you tell their life story and stuff and solve the world around the fire.
This is wonderful. And again, another example of how these things tend to fit together. You know, you're outside, you're cooking, you're eating, and also socializing. And we've in project communities, obviously, we're always very aware of how much food brings people together, which is why we run the big lunch. But it's such a social thing to do, eating together. And the idea of cooking and eating around a fire is, again, something that makes my heart sing and my stomach grumble. It all comes together.
Can I, Sophie? Sorry.
Who was first?
Fine, your food, that's fine, on you go. I was just going to say I love stick bread as well.
That's great, isn't it? Yeah. Just one of the really important messages that I took away was that, you know, not to leave a trace, and things like folding fires and things like that you can take with you that don't leave any trace, and things like that was really, really useful information. Thank you.
That's really good. I will signpost at this point to Nature Scott are running a campaign at the moment for people in Scotland on how to leave no trace, and how to make sure that you're, if you are, for example, lighting fires in the outdoors, that you're doing so in a safe way. Or, for example, that you know where your nearest toilets are, for example, if you're going way out from where there would normally be toilets. So if you're in Scotland, that will probably be really helpful. And to be honest, even if you're not in Scotland, that will be full of some useful tips and tricks as well.
I was going to, we were only in a small group of 3, so it was really lovely to be able to get an in-depth picture of what everyone was looking to do and hoping to achieve. And Anne would like to do something that's very inclusive, especially for people with dementia around a garden area. And it's just at the very, very start. And Damien already has some really big ideas for reinstating and restoring pathways in his local area, but also has something that I thought was just amazing, a foraging bed in the local village. And I just thought that sounded amazing. And then we spoke about how you really come across the positivity of people when you take on projects, and you've always got someone who's going, it's never going to work. So for instance, the foraging bed, but people will just take things out of it, which is completely the point. But just a lovely, lovely chat.
Oh, that's good. It's always really gratifying to us to hear that people get satisfying conversations and the opportunity to meet new people and make connections, because that can be such a difficult thing to do these days. And it's one of the reasons that we exist, is to help people make connections. So that's great. And I really relate to what you're saying about people don't always understand the idea of growing something in common for everyone to enjoy. We've had the same discussion about, I think, community orchards. Oh, people will just come and eat the apples. Yes, that is the point. Excellent. I'm really delighted to see that so many of you have had good experiences in your breakout rooms. I think actually this is probably a good point for me to ask you, Joe, if you would be able to share the link. We do have a wee survey that we ask people to fill in. Basically, if you enjoyed the session, please let us know. If there were things you think we could have done better that would have helped, please let us know, because we run these sessions or sessions similar to this most weeks, and it helps us. We go back over them all the time just to make sure that we're providing a really useful space. The other thing that I'd say is, if you would like to stay in contact with each other, we have a Facebook group. It's called the Eden Project Communities Network, and I'm sure the lovely Jo will be able to put a link to that in the chat as well. And that is for anyone who engages with our work, who comes to our sessions in any space or shape or form, for people to just kind of carry on making connections and chatting about this kind of thing. And we would be very, very happy to see any of you there. We do run these sessions, like I say, most weeks, and the best way to find out about them is just to like us on Facebook, because that's where we host them. And I think the only other thing I would just like to say is that, as I mentioned, we run a campaign every year called the Big Lunch, which is very much about, someone's already got their big lunch pack. Nice one, Christine.
It literally arrived during the conversation, so I'm all excited.
Oh, amazing, amazing. Oh, that's brilliant. For those of you who are new to the Big Lunch, it's very much about the idea of building connections over food. We get together, we have some fun, we eat together, and we just get to know each other a little bit better, so we can carry on making connections like this. And this year we are very much encouraging people to use outdoor spaces, which is one of the reasons we were so pleased to have Ian and Francis join us today, to get some inspiration for what that can look like, and not just for the Big Lunch, but for all parts of our life. So if you've been inspired by this and you're thinking maybe you've got an idea for a project, or maybe you're inspired to have a big lunch, you can find out more on our website, just www.thebiglunch.com. It's nice and straightforward, which makes it easy for me, or through our Facebook page as well. Ian, is there anything that you would like to signpost people to before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I just put something in chat about a link to some dementia-friendly environment resources, actually from Pastoral, which kind of we've used in the past. The other thing I'd say is have a look at, if you are based in Scotland, or even if you're not, actually have a look at the Green Space Scotland website. We've got quite a lot of resources on kind of making use of outdoor spaces and green spaces, and hope you find something useful on there.
Brilliant. I think exactly the things that we've been talking about today, Ian, are one of the things that so many of us will take from lockdown, is, a way of looking at the outdoors differently. And I hope that's something that we kind of carry forward as communities and as a society. But for now, I'd just like to say thank you all so much for coming. It has been an absolute pleasure to see so many of you here today, and I'm really glad that you enjoyed it and got the opportunity to meet some new people. Like I say, do head along to the Facebook group if you would like to carry on some conversations and carry on meeting some like-minded people, and hopefully we'll see you at another session again soon. And thank you again to Ian and Francis as well. It's been an absolute joy having you here.